Hi everyone, and welcome to the final video on the Candidates Tournament 2011. After 5 draws in the first 5 games, a win here would put either candidate against Anand next year in the World Championships. It was a great game, as you'll see. Gelfand had white against Grishuk and opened with d4, after which came knight f6, c4, g6, and knight f3, which is slightly unusual. Normal here is knight c3, and this gives black the choice between a King's Indian and a Grunfeld. Grishuk continued with bishop g7, and then came the ultra-solid g3, which combined with bishop g2 takes the sting out of any attack for black in King's Indian fashion, but it was unlikely that Grishuk was planning on that anyway. Despite being an advocate of the King's Indian, he would be unlikely to play it in such a crucial game. He'd been employing the Grunfeld instead in the Candidates Tournament, and after his next move, d5, we now have a neo-Grunfeld position from the opening. Play continued with the main line, c takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop g2, and knight b6. So white has 2 central pawns against 1, which is a claim to a small advantage from the opening, not to mention the oddly deployed b6 knight, which has come at the cost of a couple of tempo, but we're still well within theory, of course. Next came knight c3 and knight c6, applying pressure to d4 and provoking e3, which in turn hems in the dark squared bishop. However, this is a popular move with grandmasters at the moment, particularly Aronian. Now both sides castled, and Grishuk prepared the e5 push, typical of such Grunfeld positions, with rook e8, and Gelfand answered with the rook e1, which is taking measures against any later e-file activity. It should be noted that both players were exhausted by this stage of the tournament, having played almost a month of high-pressure chess. Grishuk decided to continue with a5, just stretching out his rook and starting queenside activity. And next came queen e2, which is one of the main lines, despite being a strange-looking move. So bishop g4, pinning this knight, and h3, putting the question to the bishop, which Grishuk retreated to e6. And now the first novelty of the game, which apparently was part of Gelfand's preparation, b3. It prevents black from using the c4 square for his pieces for the moment, and prepares to develop the dark square bishop. However, it tempts black into playing a4, which Grishuk decided on, and it seems like a logical choice that surely allows black to equalize. Gelfand continued with his prep, presumably with rook b1, which Fritz didn't like, now giving black a small edge after a takes b3 and a takes b3, and white now has an isolated b-pawn, a strangely posted rook as well, although it's now out of the line of fire of the bishop on g7, and black has total control of the a-file. So it's a very unusual continuation from Gelfand. The only real plus that I can see is prophylaxis against black queenside play, but my feeling is that if properly analysed, black must be able to get good play against this opening choice. Anyway, Grishuk continued with queen c8, taking aim at h3. So king h2, and now the unorthodox rook a5, which is aiming for rook h5 and further pressure on h3, which is a very interesting idea by Grishuk, and the kind of plan that, if successful, receives huge praise, and if a failure, receives huge criticism. Gelfand continued calmly with the rook d1, which prepares a later d5 advance, and one of the oldest rules in chess is that if you're getting attacked on the flank, you should attack in the center, and generally it's a very effective principle to keep in mind during play, even in short games. So now came rook h5, which increases the pressure on h3, and Gelfand dealt with it the most accurate way with knight h4. If instead h4, bishop g4 is looking good, and knight g1 is probably too passive. So knight h4, and now bishop f6, which is threatening to win a pawn on h4 at the cost of giving up the dark square bishop, which is a risky idea. Gelfand continued with f4, which wasn't the best continuation. More advisable was d5, where after bishop takes c3, d takes c6, b takes c6, bishop takes c6, and rook f8, white has a very small edge in a position that's complex and tactically dangerous. So f4 anyway from Gelfand, and rook d8 is what Grishuk played, preventing the d5 push instead of winning a pawn, which is an alternative way for him to equalize. He could have played bishop takes h4, where after g takes h4, rook takes h4, king g3 forces rook takes h3. And after bishop takes h3, bishop takes h3, black has 2 pawns for the exchange, and both sides have given up their important fianchetto bishops. However, white would get some play here with d5, and so Grishuk decided to prevent it by playing rook d8 before taking on h4 with his move rook d8. So now comes queen f2 from Gelfand, and now black can't win a pawn on h4 as the queen is also protecting it. Nevertheless, Grishuk now took the dangerous decision to give up his dark squared bishop with the bishop takes h4. And at this stage, white is going to have a tough time getting his dark squared bishop into the game because it's locked in behind these pawns. So if black can get enough play before that bishop becomes liberated, he should be okay, and Grishuk had a few great ideas in order to ensure that, but Gelfand played brilliantly too, as you'll see. First he has to recapture, so g takes h4, and now Grishuk played knight d5 with a creative idea after the pretty much forced knight takes d5, that being rook h takes d5, which is willing to give up an exchange in order to gain total control of the crucial light squares on the board. In actual fact, this move is more or less the only option here. If instead bishop takes d5, e4 is going to win a piece. Best play goes simply bishop takes e4, and white should win quite easily. So rook h takes d5, and now bishop b2, which is a great move from Gelfand, declining the offered sacrifice, as he knew only too well as a positional player that despite being ahead of material, Grishuk would have had all the play if he'd accepted. Now white will aim to advance the central pawns and liberate the bishop on b2, which will be a violent force on this long diagonal now that the dark squared bishop from the black side is gone. And you know, this is the danger when you give up your fianchetto bishop for a knight, or even for a rook. Let's have a quick look if he had accepted instead with bishop takes d5. Next will come bishop takes d5, and now say for example bishop d2, and here black can follow up with something like bishop e4, followed up with f5 or queen f5, and a rerouting of the knight to d5, supported by a pawn on c6, and some active play, although white wouldn't be passive either. It would be interesting and double-edged position. So bishop b2 anyway from Gelfand. And now rook b5. Grishuk doesn't offer his rook for a second time and takes aim at b3 instead, and Gelfand now attacked it with queen e2, and there's no rook takes b3 due to the threat of d5, which is going to win a piece. So rook h5, but now white can advance in the center, and we see some of the power in a stronger pawn center, as well as the power of the bishop pair after e4. And you know, it's threatening d5 and winning a piece, and willingly giving up the b3 pawn with bishop takes b3, attacking the rook. So rook c1, which takes control of the semi-open file. And now we have a nicely imbalanced position, but it's clear that white has all of the trumps despite being a pawn down. Grishuk continued with knight a5, and not rook takes h4, because there's serious tactical trouble after d5, where white has a close to winning position. There are too many threats here to deal with. If knight a5 or knight b4, then queen e1 is going to win a piece, and if knight b8, then bishop e5 discovers an attack on the bishop and also on a c7 pawn. So the h pawn just can't be captured here. So knight a5, and now d5, and the bishop is unleashed, and Grishuk must have been crumbling inside at this moment. The bishops are perfectly placed, and the advantage they provide when working together is especially clear in this position, and will become more so as the game progresses. Grishik continued with b6, which preparing to reroute the knight in some lines and also making rook takes h4 possible. But black is getting into difficulty after bishop e5, which is attacking the c7 pawn before and provoking c5. If instead rook d7, queen b5 is very strong and will ultimately win 2 minor pieces for a rook and the game not long after. So c5, now d takes c6, capturing en passant, so white has regained the pawn with a very strong and active position. And here Grishuk played f6, which gains a tempo on the bishop apparently and blunts this great diagonal that it was working on, but this is weakening as well. Playing instead rook takes h4, loses on the spot to c7, where best play goes rook f8 and now queen f2, which is now forking the rook and the b pawn and will decimate the black position. So f6 and now bishop a1, which was a cautious retreat from Gelfand, who must have known that he had a safe advantage in the position and there was no need to take risks, which was true. But objectively, if you ignore the pressure and fatigue both players were suffering from, there was a much stronger move here, which was c7. Best play goes f takes e5, c takes d8, queen and check, queen takes d8 and f5, and white has a huge advantage, but it's very complicated and time trouble wasn't far away, so Gelfand chose the safer option, which is understandable, with bishop a1. So Grishuk continued with the rook c5, which is hoping desperately for exchanges and simplification in order to play for a draw. And again, playing instead rook takes h4, was losing to c7, rook d7 and queen f2 as before. So rook c5, rook takes c5, b takes c5 and queen b5, which is faltering at the crucial moment because this gave Grishuk a chance to hold out. Much stronger for white here was e5, where best play goes queen f5, c7 and rook c8. If instead queen takes f4 check, simply king g1. And now rook c8, e takes f6, e takes f6 and queen e7 wins it for white. So after rook c8, white would play queen g4 with a later bishop c3. Even if the queens come off, it doesn't matter. White is completely winning from this position. So queen b5 anyway, an inaccuracy from Gelfand. But Grishuk faltered in turn with queen c7. Here he had to play bishop a2 so that there would be bishop takes b1 in the event of queen takes a5. Best play from here goes rook f1. If instead rook b2, hoping to win the bishop, now black has queen c7 to hold the balance just, because the knight is supported, and if rook takes a2, queen takes f4 check is winning for black after king g1 and now rook d1 check. Bishop f1, queen g3 check, rook g2, queen e3 check, rook f2 and rook takes a1. So rook f1 would be the right move here, and now knight takes c6, queen takes c5 and queen e6, and white's advantage is only minimal. But Grishuk missed this chance, exhausted and in bad time trouble. After his queen c7, Gelfand can win 2 pieces for a rook, with the rook takes b3, after which white is doing very well. However, Grishuk now crumbled with knight takes c6, because e5 discovers a second attacker on the knight, and unfortunately black has to give it up, but his position here is lost now, no matter what he does. And now we can really see the strength of the two bishops once more. They're totally dominating the board. Grishuk may have miscalculated here as he played knight d4, but because of his earlier weakening move f6, Gelfand could now play queen c4 check, avoiding the loss of the exchange. Even if that had happened, white would still have been much better. Grishuk resigned at this moment because he saw that after, for example, queen c4 check, king f8 is best. Now would come a series of lethal blows, starting with the rook b7, getting a rook on a 7th rank with tempo, supported by the bishop, And you know, already here White's advantage is over 7 pawns, so effectively 2 pieces up as opposed to the 1 he is, just if you count in terms of material. So Queen c8 is probably the best move here. Even Queen takes b7 might be better, but of course it's still losing. And you know, it's hard to have to play, but it does appear best. And now would come e takes f6, which just tears the black position apart. So it was an amazing game from Gelfand, who I believe was the greatest long shot to win when the Candidates tournament began. He has now earned the right to play Anand next year, and I imagine both players will be preparing fanatically already. It's an unexpected matchup and sure to be a great event. Anand of course will be the favourite, but then Boris Gelfand had his doubters at the start of this tournament too. I'll be sure to cover it when it takes place. So that's it for the Candidates tournament. I hope you enjoyed my coverage. I'll be back to you with more stuff soon. Thanks very much.